So we're going to bring up our last presenter. Jeff, you're last, but far from least. Jeff Denman is a former U.S. I may be taking. He always tells his background, but he's a former U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service forester and now a active private consultant in his retirement years and a supporter of conservation partners in the valley, a consistent one. So I'm gonna hand you this mic and I'm gonna try to see if I can get your song. There we get behind me if you don't mind.
So he said earlier, I get to keep you till dark 30. I'm not going to. I've already crouched off about half of my paragraphs because it's been well covered. I'm a forestry consultant, work only for landowners, don't work for the timber companies, don't work for the carbon companies. I'm always seeking ways for landowners to get income from their forest. And my motivation is to keep it a forest, keep habitat. I've been a wildlife forester for 40 years and I love it. So anyway, folks can generate income from their forest land, be better chance of keeping it in forest. As you've been hearing, carbon credits we accumulated. The carbon's fixed in the trees. It comes from the atmosphere. And so these carbon companies are going to pay landowners to not cut their trees. These are trees that could be harvested. The landowners got that opportunity to. But the carbon companies can take credit out of that and sell it on the carbon markets. So they're going to be paid to not cut their trees for some period of time. It's whatever the contract is. It's 100 or more years, it's for 40 years, or it's for 1 year. It just depends on which registry or exchange those carbon credits are being marketed to. Well, these carbon companies are aggregating these carbon credits. You've heard that said today. They serve as brokers. They're really handling the extensive documentation and registration it takes to sell carbon credits on the market so they can be bought and sold. So another way of thinking of it is they're the retailers. They're buying at wholesale prices. They buy from the forest landowners at a wholesale price. Their gross sales income is the retail price. It comes from the carbon buyers. That market is online. You can see what they're selling for today. Their net income calculates retail sales, less the wholesale costs, less expenses, significant upfront costs on the inventory, documentation, and registration. Then there's also customer acquisition costs, there's staff time, there's overhead expenses. And just like any other business, their margins can get squeezed pretty thin. You've heard it saying, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But it is the best way, these retail companies, the best way for them to get into the carbon market. If they've got a few hundred acres or even a couple of thousand acres, I'm convinced it's the best way. Retail prices set by supply and demand. Prices are listed, but not just today's price, there's futures. There's futures for several markets, whether it's mandatory, voluntary, whether it's from the natural sector or the industrial sector. Now, for large landowners, several thousand acres or more, there's additional opportunities to market the carbon credits directly through the various registries or exchanges without using one of the retail companies. The upfront costs are can be extensive, but the reward can be 70 to 80% of retail price instead of the wholesale value, which is running about 50% of the retail carbon price. And for these large landowners, instead of tens of thousands or $100,000, it's millions pretty quick. But it takes experts to get them through that, and those experts are in short supply. Well, as a forestry consultant, I've helped over 100 folks get enrolled so they can find out how much could they get for their carbon for a period of time. We're not cutting some or all of their trees. Some of the clients are cutting some of the trees and selling some of the credits. Others are not cutting their trees, so they get to sell all their credits. These retail companies can spare the people the time and effort it takes to learn about the carbon markets, the rules, the registries, the brokerage companies, which ones might be the best, the exchanges, the terminology, it goes on and on. It's taken a bit to learn about this. As you will have heard today, it's not a simple matter. It can be quite complicated in detail. So far, I've been able to answer all my clients' questions. And when it comes up that I can't answer the question, well, I know a number of experts a lot smarter than I can find that answer for them. On occasion, the quantity of credits that come up don't match expectations based on similar forests in my experience. In every one of those cases, I've been able to provide supplemental information, file an appeal, and every one has resulted in the landowners getting the amount of credits their land really would be producing. So with this new stream of income, this is nearly passive management for the landowners. I help them to partake of this and get more money in their pockets, additional returns that help keep the forest as a forest. Being a forest manager for wildlife habitat, I insist these landowners manage the forest first. Manage for the forest, manage for the habitat. That's their primary objectives. Use the carbon market to supplement a little bit. One example I use, I helped a lady thin her forest, and she's going to get $1,200 from the carbon market for the trees that are retained. Well, it's $1,200 she didn't have. It's not big money, but still $1,200. When I was introduced to all this carbon and these payments for not cutting trees, one of the other foresters on the Zoom call said, "This is free money." Well, the people in these companies don't think it's free. You're spending the money, but it is money to landowners. One of the positives that I've come away with on these contracts is during the term of the carbon contract, that forest is going to stay a forest. The risk of conversion is almost none. It stays as habitat. So you can look at a 1-year contract. You can look at a 40-year contract. Well, we did CRP for 10 years, did some renewals for 20 or 15 or 30 years. But that'd be a 40-year contract. That land's going to stay forest. The 100 or 125-year contract going to stay a forest because it's not cheap to buy yourself back out of it when you receive those payments. So a lot of landowners kind of shy away from the long-term contracts. But as a conservation community, I see that as a positive. So how's it been for the landowners? Well, I'll try to put it in dollars per acre per year, so I'm kind of talking similar. And I want to talk about trees and vertical sizes, at least locally. It's got to be, could be sold. Regeneration saplings begin to sequester carbon. You can see the larger trees do quite a bit more. Oh yeah, I got 2 slides. So speaking only of sales that I know of, there's been contracted for nearly $500,000. It's averaging about $6,000 per landowner. That's for a year. Rates have averaged about $7 an acre a year. It's ranged from $23 an acre a year and down to some pretty low prices for some really heavy cut over land that just didn't have much. So it's my opinion the carbon companies that I know of are competitive with their prices with each other, despite their different methodologies, registries, exchanges, and links of the contracts. I do have one client that's got 125-year contracts. She did the math. She said per acre per year for this other land she's got an interest in, worked out the same. She has to wait another 123 years for that other land to be free and clear again. So landowners with less than 3,000 to 5,000 acres, I think they should really consider companies such as what you've heard from today. You know, larger landowners or a group of landowners with similar objectives that can aggregate more than 5,000 acres, they can reach a better market. They're kind of like in Sam's Club or Costco line of this, and they can reduce their costs and have more income. But for the vast majority of landowners you're going to be dealing with, these companies such as Native State, NCX, it's a way for those landowners to get into the carbon market without having to go through all the hoops and put out $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 it takes to just get started, much less the several $100,000 it can take to do the inventory documentation and registration. So what's next? If wildlife habitat is of value to society, are there people or companies or organizations willing to pay to encourage landowners to have productive wildlife habitat similar to carbon? The answer is yes, and it's coming. That wildlife habitat is going to be monetized just like this carbon is. It's going to be retail companies that will get money from organizations want to promote and get credit for productive wildlife habitat, typically for waterfowl, microbird. And then landowners could get their portion of that. It's going to take registration, documentation, but I think it's coming and I can't wait. So there's my contact information. If you want to get in touch with me, take a picture of it. Be glad to help landowners. I've helped which I'm in Arkansas, I'm in central Arkansas, but I've got folks in every adjoining state, Louisiana. I don't have anybody in Louisiana yet. I need somebody in Louisiana, but I've got Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. It doesn't matter. They're in the lower 48 states that qualify for these programs. And I encourage landowners to take a look at it, and they can do it all themselves. They can get on, get with the native state, get with NCX direct, or they get somebody to help them get through the process. But it makes a difference. Somebody will give you another $20 an acre a year to not cut your trees in those cycles when you're not thinning anyway. Not a bad deal. Appreciate y'all having me.